Hello, dear friends and adventurers. It's Rob, the D&D wannabe, here with some exciting news. This podcast is now made possible in partnership with our good friends at Misty Mountain Gaming. Veteran-owned and operated, Misty Mountain is one of the largest dice companies in the world. They offer the widest selection of metal, gemstone, and glass dice combined. For yourself, that special role player in your life, or your favorite podcast hosts. Just saying. Look for their booth at your next local comic, anime, or gaming convention, or find their products at mistymountaingaming.com. Okay, on with the show.
I have you now, heroes. Hold person, 5th level.
He's got us now! Dooley, I can't move!
We're done for.
That's right. You have meddled in my affairs for long enough. You troublesome heroes will soon be out of my hair for good. I will unmake you, bit by excruciating bit, until there is nothing left of your sad, pathetic bodies and your I'm sorry. Is he yawning?
What?
Did you yawn?
Oh no, I'm terribly sorry. You go ahead.
Is your demise boring you? Am I boring you?
I did not mean to get in the way of your monologue. You just go right ahead.
No. The moment is ruined. You ruined it. You ruining ruiner.
Gosh, I am so sorry. That was certainly not my intention. It's just...
Nope. Go ahead. Say what it is you were thinking. Get it off your chest.
I'm sorry. You go right ahead.
Spill your guts before I spill them for you.
Ooh, well, when you put it that way... Look, I'm not trying to question your methods here. Obviously, you're the arch-villain and you know what you're doing. I just had to ask, are we really going to do this? Like, the big encounter, the final fight. Here, of all places?
Salem, what are you doing? It's alright, boys. I've got this. Just sit back and watch.
Have a little faith in the man. The lad can talk his way out of a bag of holding.
I mean, yeah, this is it. The final battle. This is where I kill you. Isn't it?
I mean, of course, it's up to you. You obviously have us at a supreme disadvantage here. Me and my party are just so done with big open caverns in the bottom of dungeons beneath mountains. I mean, this is just so expected at this point. I mean, come on.
I think subterranean death tunnels are classic.
Oh, absolutely they are. No question about it. It's like iconic. It's tried and true. That's why all the other villains are doing it.
They are? Really?
Oh, yes. Seems like every other villain and monster and despot we depose has been catching us in some sort of crypt or underground cave. We just, you've been against us from day one. We just really expected something, something special.
Got you. It's just, you really thought this was you suckers. Idiots.
See, boys, I told you. Gormanga, he's in a league all his own. Like, he has something really classy and unique planned for us for the final encounter, don't you, Gormanga?
Yeah, obviously, that's right. What you said.
See, Dooley, this is exactly what I was saying. Like, Gormanga the Bloodthirsty, he's a galleon sort of man.
Galleon man, yep, that's right.
Dooley, do you have any idea what's going on here?
I have not a clue, lad. Just play along.
Galleon. Yeah.
Yes, a galleon, like at least 3 masts, just absolutely filled to the brim with an invading party of, like, minion pirates.
Scurvy dogs. All of them. Literally, I have gnolls in my army, and they have scurvy.
With, like, these massive cannons.
Yeah, cannons. So many cannons.
And crewed with all your finest lieutenants.
All of them. Every single one.
Gareth, you remember the Rakshasa, right? What was his name?
You mean the one who really has it in for me?
Gary.
Exactly. Just think about how upset Gary would be if he didn't get to kill you with his own 2 hands.
Yeah, Gary would be really, really mad about that.
And I mean, just think about it. If he killed us down here, who's gonna know about it? How is that going to increase his fame?
Right, that is actually a really good point.
Oh, I see what's going on here. Hey, Dooley, watch this. So, what if you captured us and put us in the brig on this big galleon of yours?
Right, I can very easily capture you, as we've seen.
Exactly. I mean, you did it right now, and it was so easy for you. But what if we escaped the brig?
How would you escape?
And then got out, killed the guards,
Not my guards.
and destroyed the propulsion, sending the ship plummeting.
My ship is plummeting?
Plummeting, Gareth?
How is my ship plummeting?
Oh, I'm sorry. Were we talking about just like a regular ship? I just assumed that a villain of your stature would have an airship.
Airship. Yes.
An airship? An airship, Gareth. Of course. Oh, and maybe it's on fire.
Why is my new airship on fire?
Oh, Goremonger, baby, you just leave that to us.
What?
Oh, and it's probably going to take place in like some special place.
Yes, the capital city of Ferris.
Oh, yeah.
No, but perhaps somewhere else, Gareth?
Gareth, quit while you're ahead.
And on some special occasion when the city is especially full of my enemies, something like a holiday.
You know, the festival of St. Fife's Day is coming up soon.
Gareth.
That's perfect.
And there, the orange flames illuminating your spiky black armor, you and your sworn enemies will fight to the death as we all plummet to our mutual demise. Thousands of feet below, the king and the unwitting celebrants will look up in helpless terror as they suddenly behold the fiery wreckage descending upon them from on high.
Yes.
Children crying, women screaming, men cursing the gods for forsaking them to such a fate. There, we will have our battle.
Wow. That sounds awesome.
Oh, Gareth. See, boys? Of course, this is not the final battle. It's going to happen on an airship, apparently, on St. Fife's Day in the capital, with lots of innocent bystanders.
Oh.
Isn't that right, Mr. the Bloodthirsty, sir?
Yes. Yes. I simply wanted to show you how easily I could thwart and capture you and put you in a helpless position before I put you in an even more helpless position and killed you in a much more legendary manner.
You really had us worried there for a minute.
That's the idea.
Oh, a minute! Oh, look at that! I can move my hands again. I suppose the spell must have worn off.
Right, I meant for that to happen. So, off with you. Go quake in fear, tremble throughout your remaining days until St. Fife's night, when you will die by my hands on the ship that I have.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We are trembling.
Dreading it already, sir.
Absolutely frightened. Just pissing our pants as we walk back out this door.
And you're thoroughly scared.
Absolutely petrified. Yep.
Very intimidated.
So intimidating.
Still hate your guts, though.
Good. Yep. Till then.
Oh, yep, right. See you later.
Gareth? If Goremonger doesn't kill you, like, sharpish, I might just beat him to it.
I'm so sorry, guys. I just really got caught up in the moment. But hey, I bought us some time.
Yeah. And now we have to go warn the bloody king that his life is now in danger thanks to us.
Salem, any chance you could talk our way out of that one, too?
Gareth, I will do my best, Gareth. Compelling, original, memorable, believable, action-packed, tactical. That's right, it's an acronym for combat. These were the ingredients chosen to make the perfect D&D combat. But the DM accidentally added an extra ingredient to the concoction. And that is what we're going to talk about today here on Bardic Twinspiration. Thanks for bearing through my Powerpuff Girls reference / combat acronym. That's what I'm here for, though. My name is Steven. I'm your host, and this is Rob, my twin brother.
Hey, I'm Rob, aka D&D Wannabe, co-host of this podcast, and not as big a fan of acronyms as my brother.
I don't know that either of us really latched onto Powerpuff Girls either, but the one thing that I retained is the intro, so... But we're here for the second half of our combat episode. I guess I should say that we have a whole series of combat episodes, but this one is about how to change the environment and the situation and the context for the combat in order to make it more memorable and unique.
Right. A lot of our discussions on combat have focused on character and character development, or on mechanics that are oft unused, or at least often don't realize their potential. And that advice is useful to players and dungeon masters, but now we're targeting the dungeon masters in particular with this episode.
Right. No longer are we talking about what makes the NPCs tick or what makes the theater for the combat unique, but how can we add additional elements that are going to really make our players stop and think about what they should be doing on their turns. Because to me, at least, that's what sets a combat apart from the others, is when I, as a player, have to really consider how best to use my turn, not just throwing out another Eldritch Blast or making another swing with my longsword, but really taking in my surroundings and the other creatures that are involved in the combat and the stakes, and trying to decide what is best to do with my turn. In the interest of doing that, we're going to talk about a couple of different elements that you can add in to really shake things up for your players. And like Rob said, this is going to be DM focused.
That's right. It is your job as the dungeon master. It is my job as the dungeon master. The job of all dungeon masters, really, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is to entertain, right? You are the ringmaster. You are the storyboard artist. You're the director of this picture. And you need to make your encounters distinct and memorable and unique in your players' minds. Players can only do so much to make combats truly memorable, and that is mostly up to the dice, I feel, a lot of the time. Whether their good ideas pan out, or whether their bad ideas fail miserably, or whether they get the finishing blow or crit at a critical moment. But the setup, the venue, the environment, and the stakes, these are tools that the DM can bring to bear.
Right. Gone are the days of the 20 by 20 bland, flat room in which you encounter 6 identical goblins in a fight to the death. We have already mixed up several of those elements before, but now let's talk about how we can add something extra. How about how we can inject drama into the situation, not just through the motivations of the characters, but through the situation itself.
So when we first started kind of spitballing along these ideas, the first thing that you mentioned was the idea that the players have a complication in the combat.
Yes.
Something that is not combat, that is taking place inside and alongside the combat, that is its own, almost its own encounter. Yes. Inside of the combat encounter.
Right. This is not a fight. This is a mission. Combat is secondary to accomplishing the goal.
Like there's a win condition that
does not necessarily involve the death of every other opponent, right?
Right.
Well, I think we alluded to this a little bit in one of the earlier episodes. I think it was when we were talking about the motivation of the NPCs. Like, they might be here to protect a VIP, or they might be here to
assassinate a VIP.
Yeah, or to steal something from the players. Not just having a victory condition for the enemies, but having a different one for the players as well, such as rescuing a hostage that is being held by the NPCs, or infiltrating the NPC's hideout in order to steal the MacGuffin, without raising the alarm or attracting attention.
Sure.
Or maybe even doing it in such a way that implicates a third party. It's not just the goal of this encounter. I'm not even going to say combat. It's not even the goal of this encounter to get in without being seen and to get out with the item, but also to plant evidence that implicates your rival.
Sure. Or even just remove evidence that you were there. You see this in assassin movies and heist movies and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Not only do you have to get in, you also have to get out, and you also have to make it look like you were never there. Leaving any evidence or changing anything besides what is critical to the mission essentially constitutes a failure. And that, I think, is kind of what we're talking about, is there is a problem that the characters need to solve before they can pat themselves on the back and say, job well done. And this is taking place outside of initiative and inside of initiative. And you were talking about how you hate puzzles in D&D. But I think you said in the last episode that when initiative is rolled, you forgive puzzles. Because it's not like a puzzle or a riddle. It's more of a challenge.
Yeah. It's a question of, to me as a player, of what is the optimal thing that I need to do with my character this turn to make sure that the goal is accomplished. And the more varied or complex you make that goal, the more options I have as a player. Like, the option to run up and grapple the enemy cultist is always there. But barring the fact that I'm supposed to stop him from enacting the ritual, if he is able to move 40 feet across the battlefield, then if I just want him dead, my best option is just to stay where I'm at and keep hitting him with Eldritch Blast until he dies. But if I have to keep him from getting to the Necronomicon 40 feet away so that he can finish the incantation to open the portal to the Nine Hells, that changes things. That changes things a lot. That means that my goal is to stop him from moving, not to start whittling away at his hit points.
That actually reminds me of one of my favorite moments of the Curse of Strahd module that takes place at Yester Hill. I don't know if you recall that particular scene.
I do. Spoilers for Curse of Strahd? Go.
I think our listeners are pretty much realizing that everything that we reference, and we're going to be referencing a lot, that we're going to be spoiling it because we want to inform you and we want to talk about it.
Exactly. So if you're a player who's about to participate in a Curse of Strahd campaign, then you need to skip forward 2 minutes starting now. Okay, they've been warned. Go ahead.
One of my favorite moments in the Curse of Strahd campaign involves these druids performing a ritual, chanting the word Winter Splinter over and over. Winter Splinter, Winter Splinter. And there's a group of 10 of them, and they have to go, or I forget, maybe it wasn't 10. They have to chant without being interrupted for 10 rounds, or the ritual is finished. At least one of these druids needs to be chanting every round for it to work. And as a dungeon master, I don't tell the players this. I just start a timer in a visible place, and I start ticking it up every time initiative count hits 20. They don't know I'm counting up to 10, and they don't know necessarily what is causing it. But they know that something is getting closer to completion, and I'm describing how the clouds are darkening, and thunder and lightning are crashing around them, and how the Winter Splinter is getting more and more fanatic and frenzied. And they're trying to drop cultists, they're trying to distract cultists, or push them out of the ritual area, and it becomes really exciting, because I think the last time I ran that encounter, I made it up to round 9 out of 10 before they managed to actually halt the ritual, and it wound up dropping 3 out of 4 members of the party trying to do it. But they stopped it, which is great, because they were not ready for what would have happened if that ritual had finished.
Right. Yeah, I remember you, after we finished that encounter when I was in that campaign, you told us what would have happened if we had something like, we had no idea what was going on. We're like, oh, well, it's good. Glad we avoided that. Yeah, I think adding that sort of countdown element is actually like one of the most engaging and nerve-wracking options for you to use as a DM to really get your players invested in what's going on. I know that some DMs actually will put a timer on the table and just use, in real time, you have this long to solve the problem before this happens. Or you can do like you did with the Winter Splinter, Curse of Strahd, and have a certain number of rounds are going to transpire before this happens. And whenever that timer runs out, be it real time or be it combat rounds, something is going to change. You're going to add something new to the combat. You're going to remove the possibility to accomplish the goal or to fully realize your goal, or you are going to succeed in making sure that the villains cannot fully realize their goal.
Something that they did a lot in 4th edition was something called skill challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Skill challenges are one of those things that you either love them or you hate them, and you either run them well or you don't. But they set a good precedent. I don't think they were realized as well as they should have been, and they were somewhat, in an odd way, they were both underutilized and overutilized in 4th edition, oddly enough. But it's something that I have sprinkled into my campaigns, where your skills become pertinent in combat. Let's say that you're trying to stop the ritual, but there's just too many cultists. There's no way you can drop them all in time. Maybe the wizard has to deface the arcane sigil that has been drawn on the ground, that is a crucial component of this ritual. Maybe the rogue needs to steal the sacrificial dagger or throw some nullifying agent into the cauldron. Maybe the paladin needs to rescue the person that has been set aside and is going to be sacrificed before the cult leader can make it there with their ritualistic weapon. Something that takes the abilities on your character sheet traditionally reserved for combat and makes them less valuable, but makes the skills things that traditionally kind of stay out of combat and makes them pertinent and makes the guy who is really smart useful in the combat, or makes the guy who's really clever or versatile useful in the combat.
Sure. Or, have the barbarian drop his axe and go and flip the table.
Sure. So if you were in the situation where a ritual was going on, maybe both the wizard and the cult leader are making checks, and the wizard needs to succeed on 3 arcana checks to destroy the sigil before the cult leader succeeds on 3 religion checks to complete the ritual. Or maybe the wizard just needs to do his job correctly. Maybe he's not being bothered. The paladin has taken that cult leader out of the equation, and he just needs to succeed 3 times before he fails 3 times and accidentally sets the ritual off anyway.
Yeah, and I think Mercer will sometimes do it to where you have to get a certain number. Matthew Mercer, Critical Role, everyone knows who he is by now, and that's probably not thanks to us. But we'll have a couple of members of the party attempting to accomplish a common goal, very much in this line, and he'll say, you know what, you have to get to 40 or 60 or something like that, and maybe it's going to take you 4 rolls to do it, or maybe it's going to take you 2 rounds and 2 people or something like that, but once you get to that number, then you've accomplished the goal.
Right, and those kinds of things are more in line with how I think skill challenges ought to work. Is you have a problem, you have a skill that is relevant to the issue, and you utilize it to great effect. I think in 4E you were supposed to choose a skill and explain how it was supposed to be relevant, but maybe there were only a certain number of choices in the adventure that was printed, and maybe nobody in your party had those things or didn't think they were fun or useful. And requiring those things, I think, is potentially bad DMing. But being open to alternative solutions to the problems that involve the skills and may take some time to accomplish, or multiple rounds to accomplish, or may have a risk involved for failing, but that have great rewards are great. I mean, that's what you want. That's what I want as a dungeon master, is for my players to come up with ideas like this, and that's the kind of stuff I try as a player.
2 points about what you said. One is that my very first D&D live or actual play podcast was a 4E campaign, and they typically ran them as a skill challenge would be you need 3 successes before 2 failures, or something like that. And it was a situation where they would call for that skill check, and the player would have to describe how that would be relevant. And then based on how good of a job they did of describing that, or how relevant the DM thought it would be, he determined a DC specific to that check in that circumstance. And they did those a lot in 4E, you're right. The second thing that I wanted to touch on was that you were talking about a degree of failure based upon a skill check. One of the things that it mentions in the DMG is the 3 possible outcomes of an encounter, combat or otherwise. You should be prepared to have a full success, a full failure, or I feel like the oft-forgotten partial success in an encounter, be it skill check, be it combat encounter, etc. You as a DM should be prepared to present your players with those options. Not everything is black and white. You might prevent the we're still rolling with this ritual example, so you might prevent the cultists from fully opening the gate, but it lets something out. Or you might prevent them from resurrecting their leader, or they might come back, but they might come back imperfect.
Sure. Or let's say you rescue the maiden from the town that was going to be sacrificed, but the cult leader gets away. Or you don't manage to close the portal in time, but you do destroy the tome that the cult leader holds so valuable that taught him the ritual, and this kind of thing can never be done again.
Yeah, and I think that I could be wrong about this, so internet, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think Matthew Mercer has talked about using this sort of scale on his resurrections as well. Like, you might bring someone back, but they might not have their memories, or they might not have all of their abilities that they left with, or they might come back with an alignment shift or something like that if you have a slightly botched resurrection. Anyway, the time element that we were discussing, I think, bears kind of a deeper dive, because I really feel like that is a very effective way to raise the stakes for both the characters involved in the combat and the players sitting around your table. So, barring the ritual example that we've already used, what are a couple other ones that you could see presenting your players with that involve a time element?
Okay, so one that I used pretty early in my first campaign is you have gone to the place, you beat the dungeon, you beat the boss, you grab the artifact, and then in a Cave of Wonders, I've grabbed the lamp style, everything starts falling apart. The temple is collapsing, and you need to escape, or you will be buried alive. You know, classic one, Disney used it, I used it. I think Indiana Jones has stuff like that in it as well.
It does, yeah.
But you could also have, like, beat this encounter before the bad guys get their reinforcements. Or you need to disrupt the spell before the crystal is charged. Mm-hmm. Or the other way around. You need to be able to hold this position until your reinforcements arrive.
Yeah, and I think that's one I've never actually participated in. Having a victory condition that involves the players holding out against nigh insurmountable odds. But if you can last for enough rounds, then Gandalf and the Rohirrim are going to run in and save everyone.
I was about to say, that's your Helm's Deep situation right there.
Exactly, yeah. I know, I referenced Helm's Deep a couple episodes ago. All they had to do was wait until first light on the 5th day. And they didn't realize it, but if they could, victory was assured.
Yeah, that is a great example. Kind of flipping the ritual idea on its head. I mentioned Divinity: The Original Sin 2 in my last episode. There is a moment on the Lady Vengeance where the hammer has arrived, and she has brought these sourceless creatures to kill your adventuring party, and they're just trying to make good their escape. Malady, the half-demon, who is allied with your party, is conducting a ritual that will get you and your friends and your ship all out of Dodge, but she needs time to complete it, and you are going to die in that encounter. The enemy is formidable and dangerous and well over your level, but you don't have to kill them all to win that encounter. You just have to keep yourself and Malady alive until she can finish that spell.
Also, going back to like the ritual thing, one of the things that I had mentioned would be the cultists are trying to complete a ritual to open a portal to the Nine Hells. But the reverse of that, what if you are trapped in the Nine Hells and you need to get out, and the portal is only open for a certain number of rounds for you to be able to get home, and you have to make it there before it closes, and you're trapped here for good. That's some stakes, my friend.
Yeah.
I do want to mention that this is one of the things that I particularly enjoy watching Critical Role for. Mercer has done a great job of adding in some inherent countdown timers into his combats. Like in Campaign 1, there was a room that was slowly filling with acid. In Campaign 2, there was an encounter where each round, everyone took fire damage. There may have even been more than one of those. In fact, he also, like in the finale for Campaign 2, there was a hidden countdown timer that we didn't find out about until they released the wrap-up. The players did not realize that there was a ticking time bomb in that encounter, but there very much was. Other little ways you can do this are to, say, have a encounter underwater, and you have a certain number of rounds that you can survive underwater before your characters are just going to drown.
I don't think y'all realized it until the encounter was almost over. When you guys fought Subayan in our current campaign, it wasn't so much a time element as it was a ticking clock in a way, that she was afflicting you guys with this bleeding status effect.
Oh, yeah.
Which is not a condition in 5th edition, but it was something that she could do to y'all.
It was for that encounter.
And the more she could make y'all bleed with her attacks, the more she could heal herself. Mm-hmm. And you would eventually get to a point where she effectively couldn't be killed. And you guys were perpetually taking damage from this ailment. Luckily, Mags got a little supercharged, and you guys had no problem taking her out before that became a real issue. But there was definitely a point at which that encounter could have been taken up to 11.
That was actually a really interesting encounter, and I know that we're going to come back and reference that here in a little while, because you have incorporated a lot of these aspects into the combats that you've run in the campaigns in which I've participated. I wanted to come back to that point that I made about fighting underwater and having the possibility of drowning on the table, despite, hit points aside, because that reminded me of probably the most memorable combat for me in another campaign that you ran for me. You dubbed it the Reawakening Campaign. Mm-hmm. And this may or may not have been a big deal for you, but I remember it very distinctly. My Dragonborn Paladin found himself challenged to a duel because he had insulted the pride of a Sahuagin prince.
Yeah.
Which, for those of you who don't know, is basically evil buff merfolk.
Yeah, someone's gonna get on to us about our pronunciation of Sahuagin.
Sahuagin. Yeah, sure.
Sahuagin.
Sahuagin.
I read it Sahuagin, so I'm going to stick with Sahuagin.
Cool. So the Sahuagin prince got his butt hurt by something that I had said. So he challenged me to a duel, and I think I was like a level 7 Dragonborn Paladin, and I was riding high. I had a 20 plus AC. I don't remember if I'd gotten my magic sword by this point or not, but I was pretty strong for my level. Oath of Vengeance Paladins are the best paladins in my book.
Certainly they were with the subclasses available at the time.
So I was raring to go to fight this guy, and then he just starts walking away from me. So I'm like, okay, I guess we're not going to do this here. And the jerk starts walking into the water, like into the roiling ocean. And that's where this combat is going to take place. I had never had any sort of combat underwater, and that changed so much. Water combat, for those of you who don't know, does have rules in D&D 5e. First off, you have to use your swimming speed, which Dragonborn don't have. Mm-hmm. So I could hardly move, and my very nice magic sword was useless because there's only 5 weapons that you can attack with without disadvantage underwater.
If you don't have a swim seed.
Right. And fortunately, I did have some of them, and it actually made that a very close fight. Unfortunately, I did end up losing.
That's fine. He cheated.
Oh, he did? I don't know if I even knew about that.
He had magic you didn't know about.
I gotcha. Well, that does make me feel a little better. But I think it was fairly close, you know. Of course, I'm taking your word for
it was very close.
All of that stuff. But I think it came within a round or two of combat as to which of us was going to win. But I felt really good about being a dragon, you know, a half dragon in plate armor, slowly sinking in the water, trying his darndest to fight something that could move 3 or 4 times his speed and attack without disadvantage. That was my most memorable combat of the campaign. It was just me and a Sahuagin alone in the water. Other combats in that campaign have kind of come and gone, but that one was just so unique just by virtue of the fact that I had to keep track of my breath. I had to change up the weapons that I was using, and I had access to 3-dimensional movement. Mm-hmm. You know, I could swim up or down in addition to just, you know, left, right, forward, and backward. So, highly recommend incorporating a water combat into your campaign at some point.
It's kind of a joke that in the campaigns that I run, you're going to have at least one fight in the water. You're going to have at least one trip on a boat.
Sure, there's the water level, the lava level, just like any good Super Mario campaign.
And then after you experience that, my players never want to go back because the water is bad. But, I mean, that's something that I feel like I've been harping on through this, but let me go ahead and get it out of my system now once and for all. If no other element of your encounter is memorable, putting it in a memorable place can really make it stand out. I didn't know that underwater combat was so memorable for you. It makes me really happy to hear that. Because for me, that was just a one-on-one fight between a Sahuagin protector, the princess's right-hand man, and Gore, you know, the Dragonborn Paladin. But just the setting of being dueled outside of a Mareed prince's castle on the eve of his wedding, asking you to step outside, which happened to be into the roiling ocean, made a big impression.
Yep.
And that's something you can really lean into as a dungeon master. You can take your combat and put it on the back of an enormous sky turtle. And doesn't matter what happens in the combat, your players will talk for years about the combat that they had on the back of a flying turtle the size of a jumbo jet. You mentioned being on the wrong side of a portal to hell. Having them fight in a flaming landscape, being choked by sulfur and surrounded by the hordes of hell. Super memorable just by virtue of where you were and what you were doing. A campaign down into the crystal caverns where luminescent pinks and greens and turquoises from the strange crystal formations in the Underdark are the only light you have. That's super memorable. If you look back to some of the best fights in Critical Role or Dice Camera Action or Acquisitions Incorporated is actually a great one because they have an airship that they use to fly around in and fight on.
Yep.
They fight in cloud castles, and they fight at taverns built into purple worm carcasses in the Underdark where Drow and Mind Flayers and Dritz Duerden shows up. And setting can make such an impression.
It can. There can even be mechanical implications to those. Like I had mentioned the water combat. Mercer actually did some more good work. I feel like it's redundant and or obligatory to pat Matthew Mercer on the back.
You do it an awful lot. We could probably haul back on that.
The guy doesn't need it because I think he's probably the world's most famous DM at this point, hands down, no contest. But he had an incredible encounter with a kraken on the elemental plane of water in campaign 1. He just immediately put all of his players on the back foot by doing so. He had an encounter underneath Whitestone where someone casts reverse gravity and suddenly everyone's having an encounter on the ceiling until someone makes that spellcaster lose concentration and then everyone falls to the floor. I thought that was really cool.
Recently, we've had encounters in the Astral Sea where people move by thought instead of by ambulation.
That is so cool, because I am enamored with the concept of three-dimensional movement in D&D, as I think I stated in the last episode. The ability to take away someone's movement speed and replace it with something that's based on a completely unrelated stat, and then give everyone the ability to fly. Perfect three-dimensional movement at varying speeds based on their intelligence is awesome. Aerial combat, I think, is really fun, even if you have to do it on the prime material plane and you just have people riding on the backs of hippogriffs.
That'd be fun.
Or your paladin astride his Pegasus fighting against Aranyas or Vargwheels or other flying opponents. Fight a dragon in the air. Cast some spells at the Tarask from atop your flying carpet. Changing the environment in a very big and bombastic way is going to make a combat memorable, but it can also just really throw your players for a loop. It can set itself apart in terms of theme and in terms of just how they are able to operate mechanically.
So, speaking of which, we kind of talked about how limiting your players' options can make the combat more interesting. You know, there's only a few weapons that'll work underwater well, unless you have a swim speed. And how it can also increase their options, like being on the astral sea and being able to move by thinking about it.
Yeah, you take away some aspect of the character and force them to use the rest of their character sheet, which, because they could so easily rely upon the aspect you took away, it forces them to consider a bunch of other options that they never would have done otherwise.
So I think it's important to present those unique options when you are creating and designing these encounters as a dungeon master. When you are on the back of that flying turtle, have the bad guys and the good guys have the ability to knock people off of that turtle.
Yeah.
When you are fighting next to a river of lava, you have the opportunity to maybe yeet someone into that river of lava. When you are fighting in a prison underneath the fortress, you have the option of shoving somebody in a cell and slamming that door. I think Patrick Rothfuss got kind of infamous in the Acquisitions Incorporated games for utilizing the environment to his advantage in this way and finding alternative angles of attack, specifically cutting chandeliers down and having them fall on his enemies, or swinging around on the ropes and fighting from above, which made him very swash, swash, buckle, buckle.
Yeah, very Errol Flynn, very Pirates of the Caribbean.
But that's one of my favorite things about designing encounters, is writing in these options, and then if the players don't jump on it, having one of the bad guys go and interact with some element of the environment, kind of, I mean, A, because it might be the optimal thing to do, but B, to kind of tell the players, it's okay. Let your characters do it. This is an option that is on the table for you. This might not be in the next encounter. Kind of do this while you can. In my first campaign, this was kind of a failing of mine. I put these ballista on the second floor of a wyvern fight. So you were in this ruin, everybody was on the first floor, there were some wyverns and wyvern riders down there, and they were fighting them. And I thought, what would be great if they could run over to a ballista, haul back on this thing, and take half a wyvern's health away with a well-placed bolt. Thought that would be awesome. But the whole fight took place on the first floor. My players didn't even run up those stairs, and they never got used. And the bad guys never turned those ballista down on the players either. And this cool element of my encounter just got wasted. It never got utilized.
Yeah, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Right, and when that happened, I kind of promised myself two things. So whenever I design an encounter, there will be at least one weird thing about this encounter. One thing that is different, that is available here, that wasn't available in the last encounter and won't be available in the following encounter, and that someone is going to use that thing, even if it has to be me.
I say this as someone who has not yet homebrewed a campaign or written his own dungeon or anything like that. But I personally believe, and this is something I will do whenever I get around to it, that every intentional combat encounter should have a immediately obvious environmental aspect that a player could use to their advantage. Say the lava flow. That is a environmental hazard that should be avoided by the players, but that they could use to their advantage by nudging some enemies into it.
Yeah.
You as a DM want to make sure that if any of your players bite, they take the bait and they interact with the environment that you've given them, you want to make sure that the damage is, maybe not completely broken, but certainly, as good or better than them hitting the opponent with their sword. And then I think that I would also probably give it another element that's there for the people who are looking for it, or maybe that's there as a surprise. Like, say, you can see with your dark vision that there are puddles of liquid on the ground, but you're not sure what they are. Could be water. Turns out it's actually an extremely flammable oil. And that should any pyromaniac wizards get a little bit trigger happy and toss a firebolt or, God forbid, a fireball, they're all going to ignite and make difficult, damaging terrain throughout the combat floor. There could also be some powder kegs that are stuck in the corner, just a couple of barrels as far as anyone can see without taking the time to inspect them, but turns out it's actually explosive and will take out 3/4 of the room should anyone toss some fire near them. Fire is really good for this sort of stuff.
That's something that you expect in every video game, is you see the red barrel in the corner and something goes off in your brain like, shoot that. Even if it is just literally a red barrel or a keg with kind of this icon of fire with a big X. Something to kind of tip your players off that, hey, there's something different here, is welcome and always adds a new angle to the fight. Yep. This is something our uncle does really well. You're talking about kegs of powder. That was literally part of the last encounter that we had, was this Etten or ogre, I think it was an Etten, would walk around a corner, and then every other round he would come back with the barrel in his hand and just huck it at the biggest group of good guys and watch us blow up and burn.
That's so very Dark Souls.
Yeah. There was another encounter where we were in a Wanti temple, and there were snake pits that made any of us that walked through them move at difficult terrain, and certain stimuli in the room could startle the snakes and make them aggressive, and they would attack.
Why did it have to be snakes?
Yeah, exactly. Little things like that in the combat environment, whether they're a two-edged sword that either side could use, or whether they're just a danger for the players, or whether they're just a gift to the players to use against the enemies, can really, just really up the variety in your fights.
One of my favorite combos to use as a player is to have a party member, sometimes myself, cast web and then set it on fire.
Yeah.
Because there's an actual mechanical damage advantage to setting web on fire. And you can easily set something like that up for your party of mundane melee characters, just with the powder kegs and a torch. You can also be more subtle about it. I thought about a environment where you're exploring an alchemist's lab, and there's just a big shelf with a bunch of vials, and they all have little descriptions written in a language that you don't understand. And at some point in the fight, this thing gets tipped over. Maybe it's full of healing salves, and whoever it falls on actually gets bolstered for the upcoming fight. Or maybe it's full of corrosive acid, and the person who it falls on pretty much instantly gets dropped.
That happened in an Ac Inc. campaign, an Acquisitions Incorporated game, where a bunch of vials got spilled over Viari, and they rolled on a random table to see what happened to him. Dude wound up playing that whole game a few inches tall. He got shrunk. It was great. I mean, it could have been anything.
Oh, that's even better. I didn't even think about applying spell effects to them. I was thinking conditions like the poisoned condition or paralyzed or blind.
There's potions for all kinds of stuff. It could have been a potion of diminution. It could have been a potion of growth. It could have been a potion of invisibility or strength or invulnerability or whatever it is. Anything that can come in a bottle could have been poured over this guy. He could have been covered in sovereign glue. Wouldn't that have been great?
That would have been great.
Or in oil of slipperiness. How great would that have been?
We've talked about a lot of volatile liquids and things.
You know us, we love our fluids.
The vials and potions. I had a couple of other ideas, like, maybe you are going through the Beastmaster's cave, and there's a bunch of really dangerous animals that are just barely contained within these, loose iron bars, and it's all well and good until you end up within 10 feet of one of these cages, and then a tentacle whips out and grapples a player, or you actually got within range of claw or bite attacks or things like that. These animals are not an active participant in the combat because they're locked in the cages, but a creature becomes an environmental hazard.
Yeah. I could see the Beastmaster just taking his turn, moving from cage to cage and unlocking them. We actually played Gloomhaven together, I guess it was a while ago now. I was going to say not all that long ago, but it's been a minute. Mm-hmm. And there was this one scenario where the bad guy we were chasing just literally spends his turn going from door to door, opening a door and adding new guys to the fight. And he's the only one with a key to these doors with the imprisoned undead behind them. So if he doesn't unlock them, they don't get unlocked, they don't become a part of the scenario. But that is effectively a hazard of the environment and something that could be prevented by the player characters or utilized by the player characters.
I actually really like Gloomhaven, and I think that there is a lesson or two in that game to be taken into Dungeons & Dragons, but that's a topic for another day. So we've talked about environmental hazards. We've talked about some different settings that you can use for your encounters, but the simplest one, I think, is one that we haven't mentioned yet, which is simply difficult terrain. This is just ground that is more difficult to cross, or you have to expend care when doing so. Like, it can be ground that is covered by caltrops, or it could be ground that is especially steep. As your character attempts to change his elevation from the low ground to the high ground, he has to climb up this incline, which is going to involve him using hands and feet to do so. Not outright climbing, but he can't just sprint up it. He's going to have to expend some effort, so it becomes difficult terrain, and it just penalizes players and NPCs for moving across certain boundaries that you have set up without outright damaging them or completely barring their egress.
It is amazing how much it will affect a player's decision-making process when you tell them that a single space will cost them 5 extra feet of movement on the grid.
I can vouch for that.
It is wild.
Like, if I have to wade across this river rather than running across a bridge, I'm pulling out my ranged attacks.
Yeah.
I am no longer using my, +2 longsword. I'm whipping out my javelins because I don't want to have to waste the movement and leave myself vulnerable, stuck in the middle of this waterway for a round. So I'd rather just sit back and make my normal attacks.
And it can really change the mood of a combat when that difficult terrain is only one way. When it's something that only, for whatever reason, that only affects the player characters. If these dryads cast Entangle, or Spike Growth, or some spell to alter the terrain, but it doesn't affect them. Or if a levitating or flying creature, what kind of advantages they have when the players are forced to be on difficult terrain. If you have some harpies attacking the player on a mountainside where the player's movement is very limited, but the harpies have the whole sky. Or like you had with that Sahuagin Prince, where your ability to move and fight severely hampered, but in the water, that shark boy was in his element.
Right.
He had every advantage against you.
Yeah, that can make a fight extremely one-sided. It can turn a fairly standard encounter into a deadly encounter to have your players all kneecapped, so to speak, with experiencing half movement, and to have them being constantly dive bombed by flying characters that can then swoop back up and hide in the foliage unseen by the characters. That is going to make all of your players ready actions to attack and defend themselves whenever something comes and swoops down, rather than doing the thing that they probably would like to do. It makes things just... I just really enjoy that sort of thing. You know, get a player out of their element and force them to be creative, because that's what they're going to remember.
And those different landscapes that you have them in with those different elements, they don't have to stay the same through the entire fight.
No, they don't.
You can up the stakes or lower the stakes, or have the players be able to affect them throughout the course of the fight. Say you're on that ledge and the harpies are dive bombing you. The bard casts Thunder Wave for some reason, and a rock slide or an avalanche begins. And suddenly the area is difficult terrain, or they have to find cover before the bulk of the mountainside crashes down upon them. That normal terrain becomes difficult terrain, or there is damage incoming. Say you're on a ship and it starts sinking because a cannonball hits the side, or someone cast fireball on it. There's a fire that you have to put out, or the Kraken crushes part of the hull. Mm-hmm. You have a new problem that needs dealing with. The environment is changing. The water level is rising. What was normal terrain is becoming difficult terrain, and soon it's going to become underwater. And Gore never wants to be in that position again.
Yeah. That makes a great marriage of the time element that we discussed earlier and a dynamic landscape. You know, yeah, you can move across the whole map for now.
Yeah.
2 rounds from now, you're not going to be able to stand there. In 2 rounds, it'll be difficult terrain. In 4 rounds, you'll be swimming there.
Yeah.
I think that a great example of this kind of changing landscape and taking a situation from bad to much, much worse would be the Fellowship of the Ring, when the party is running from what they do not yet realize is the Balrog, and they are retreating down the steps to the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, and the steps start to fall away. Mm-hmm. Maybe the first member of the party gets to run across as normal. The second guys have to make a short jump. Next group has to make a much bigger jump. And then every turn, everyone has to get across this gap. But now the players have to be strategic about making sure that everyone is able to get across this gap. Otherwise, someone is going to end up with an impossible jump, stranded with the devil that is chasing them.
I cannot jump the distance, you're going to have to toss me.
I know that's a different movie, but still.
But they're being subject to the goblin arrows the whole time, which, you know, the goblin arrows were not an ideal situation already. But now you're taking that, and which is the problem that they're trying to solve, and which is the complication? Is the problem the jump and the receding terrain, or is the problem the arrows? And which one of those is making the other one harder? The line gets blurred. Is this a skill check or a combat? I don't know anymore, and that's what makes it great.
That's a really good pull. Good pull.
Thanks.
Great pull.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you very much. There are a couple more things that I think we should address here, but once again, we're really trying to stick to that hour time frame.
Somewhere around there.
And we have gotten really close to that once again. So why don't we just come back and pick up from here for part 3, Electric Boogaloo. It's part 2, Electric Boogaloo, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think there's a few more things that can be situationally leveraged to make your encounters distinct and to set them apart in the minds of your players, to make those encounters stand out. But I think we'll have to get to those next time.
Right, we've covered the terrain, or lack thereof. That can really impact your players' ability to move around in a way that they wish. We've covered adding in some obstacles or some environmental aspects that the characters or their enemies might be able to take advantage of to really mix things up or add some unexpected damage or terrain changes to the battlefield. We've also talked about battlefields that change themselves, rising water, crumbling bridges, things like that, and really just cranking up the intensity and the drama and the anxiety at your table by adding some sort of time element.
And we're going to just keep cranking that dial in our next episode. Until it airs, where can the good people find a little more of us, Stephen?
Well, we have a couple of different options. I'm always looking for more people to come and join us on our Discord, link in the description, because I really enjoy talking about this hobby more than I have the ability to record podcasts.
And we can get away with responding to stuff at work when we can't do it.
And one of these days I might get tired of talking to you and just want some variety. So, dear listener, you can give me that variety.
The day's coming soon.
We also have a Facebook and a Twitter account. Links in the description and more info in the outro about how you can find us on those. But where can we find more of your content, Rob?
So I am D&D Wannabe on Twitter. I am a content creator, so I have some articles and at least one module, depending on when this airs, up on Misty Mountain Gaming's website. My articles are on their dungeon feed, my modules in their shop. Check them out. There might be something for you in there.
Now, there's definitely lots of dice that come in much better containers than my little plastic boxes that we mentioned last episode.
Even the boxes are beautiful.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this once before, but do go and check out their products. We are not in any way sponsored by them.
Nope.
But I have looked into getting some fancy stone and metal dice just for whenever the quarantine is fully over and I get to play at a table again, and I don't know how I missed them before, but I surely regret doing so.
Real talk, they have some stuff just that nobody else is doing right now as a guy who, trolls dice websites for fun.
Didn't I see they have an actual amethyst dice set?
I guess you'll have to go to the website and find out.
And we do hope that you do, and most of all, we hope that you tune back in for our next episode.
See you then.
See you then. The outro music you're listening to right now is called Mega Epic, and the intro music is called Super Epic. Both were composed by the wonderfully talented Alexander Nakarada and utilized under a Creative Commons license. You can find more of his music at serpentsoundstudios.com. If you enjoyed our content, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and review on your listening app of choice. To keep up with us on social media, look us up on facebook.com/Bardic Twinspiration and on Twitter @BTwinspiration. Want to interact with us directly? Come join our Discord. After all, who are we if not people who are willing to roll the dice on making some new friends? Links in the description. Come check it out. Spoilers for Curse of Strahd? Go.
I think our listeners are pretty much realizing that everything that we reference, and we're going to be referencing a lot, that we're going to be spoiling it because we want to inform you and we want to talk about it.
Oh yeah, just get ready. If you're a player who is about to participate in a Curse of Strahd campaign, we'll give you a timestamp to skip ahead to.
So I hate promising that. I would rather cut that out than have to do the timestampy. Anyway.